Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we have a powerful story about standing up against injustice and the incredible impact that courage can have in the face of adversity. In this story, we meet Eric, a young black man who, after a long shift at his job, walks into a McDonald's hoping for a simple meal. But what starts as a routine visit soon turns into a frustrating encounter with racial prejudice when Eric's order is ignored and delayed for no apparent reason. Just when things seem to escalate, a brave 12-year-old boy named Caleb steps in to challenge the authority of Officer Jake Thompson, a local cop who unfairly targets Eric. What happens next will not only shock you, but also show just how much one person's courage can make a difference. Stay tuned as we dive into this inspiring tale of standing up for what's right. Eric had just wrapped up a long, exhausting shift at the local hardware store. His feet ached, his stomach growled, and all he could think about was a warm meal. He'd been looking forward to this moment all day, the simple joy of grabbing a cheeseburger and fries from McDonald's before heading home. As he walked into the familiar restaurant, the bright lights and the smell of fries filled the air, offering a small sense of comfort after a long day. He approached the counter, where Linda, the middle-aged cashier, greeted him with a smile. "One cheeseburger and fries, please," Eric said, his voice polite and tired. Linda quickly punched in the order and smiled back. "Coming right up," she replied, her tone warm and professional. Eric thanked her and found a seat near the window, his eyes glancing out at the street as he settled in, looking forward to a few quiet moments of rest. But as he sat there, something odd started to happen. Minutes passed, and he noticed that the group of teenagers who had arrived after him were already laughing and chatting with their meals in front of them. A regular, someone Eric recognized from the neighborhood, got his food moments after sitting down. Yet Eric, who had ordered first, was still waiting. The clock ticked on. 5 minutes, then 10, and still no sign of his food. The tension began to build. Eric glanced around, his stomach tightening with frustration. Why was he being ignored? He was hungry, tired, and just wanted the meal he'd ordered. What was going on? As the minutes dragged on, Eric's frustration grew. His stomach rumbled louder now, and he glanced around the diner, watching as everyone who had arrived after him received their food. The group of teenagers who had been laughing and chatting when he first walked in were halfway through their meal. Even the regular, the man who always sat at the same booth, had been served right away. Meanwhile, Eric sat there, growing more agitated with each passing second. His patience, once infinite, was now running thin. Finally, he couldn't stay silent any longer. He stood up and made his way toward the counter, trying to stay calm but unable to mask the frustration in his voice. "Excuse me," he said, addressing Linda, who was busy filling another order. "I've been waiting for a while now. Is my food coming?" Linda didn't even look up at him as she mumbled, Yeah, it's coming. Just wait your turn." Her tone was dismissive, as if his question didn't matter. Eric felt a wave of disbelief. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't caused a scene. He was simply trying to understand why his order was taking so long when everyone else was being served. But before he could respond, a voice from behind him broke through the growing tension. "You causing trouble here, boy?" Eric turned around to see Officer Jake Thompson standing there, his broad frame filling the doorway. Thompson was a regular in the diner, always hanging around, often making his presence known in the most uncomfortable ways. His reputation with the town's black residents was less than stellar, and now he was stepping into this situation, ready to escalate it. Despite Eric's calm demeanor, Thompson's eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer. "I said, you causing trouble?" he repeated, his voice harsh and accusing. Eric's heart raced, but he stood his ground, knowing he hadn't done anything wrong. "I'm not causing trouble, officer," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm just asking about my food. It's been a long time. But Thompson wasn't interested in hearing any more explanations. Instead, he squared up to Eric, his tone cold. You better keep it down, or I'll have to ask you to leave. The atmosphere in the diner shifted instantly, and all eyes turned toward the exchange. What had started as a simple misunderstanding was now being transformed into something much bigger. Eric's frustration bubbled to the surface as Officer Thompson's words hit him like a punch. He hadn't done anything wrong. He was simply waiting for his food, like everyone else. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of his annoyance. I'm just asking why my order is taking so long, he said, trying to reason with Thompson. I'm not causing trouble. But Officer Thompson wasn't listening. Instead, his stance grew more imposing, and his eyes locked onto Eric with a cold, calculated glare. I don't care about your order, Thompson said, stepping even closer, his voice now a low growl. If you don't shut up and sit down, I'll have to ask you to leave. Got it? The air in the diner felt thick, heavy with tension. Eric's heart raced, but he didn't back down. He wasn't about to let this officer intimidate him into silence. I'm not leaving, Eric replied, his voice firm. I've been polite. I'm just asking why I'm being ignored. The words hung in the air, but Thompson was done trying to reason. You don't want to make this worse, boy, he warned, his tone turning more aggressive. I'll throw you out of here in a second if I have to. The crowd of diners, once engaged in their own conversations and meals, now sat in uneasy silence. Some stared at their food, too afraid to make eye contact with either of the men. Others watched, unsure of what to do, their nervous glances darting back and forth between Eric and the officer. No one spoke up. The power dynamic was clear, and they all knew it. Everyone seemed to understand the unspoken rule: keep quiet, or risk becoming a target themselves. But the silence in the diner was deafening, and Eric could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. He stood his ground, aware that his every word and movement was being observed by the quiet crowd. But the reality of the situation was not lost on him. He wasn't just fighting for his meal. He was fighting for his right to be treated with respect. As the tension reached its peak, a small yet strong voice cut through the heavy silence. Leave him alone. Caleb, a 12-year-old boy sitting with his mother, Mayor Jenkins, spoke up from his table. His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of someone far beyond his years. Caleb had been quietly watching the entire scene unfold, his eyes wide with disbelief. As Eric stood his ground against the officer, Caleb could no longer remain silent. The injustice in front of him stirred something inside him, something fierce. He wasn't going to let this moment slip by, not when it was so wrong. You can't just arrest him because you don't like the way he's asking for his food, Caleb said, his voice clear and unwavering. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. Caleb's words hung in the air, cutting through the tension in the room. The other diners, who had been too afraid to speak up, now turned their attention to the young boy who dared to stand up against authority. But Officer Thompson wasn't impressed. If anything, the boy's courage only fueled his anger. He spun around to face Caleb, his eyes narrowing with a flash of rage. What did you say, boy? Thompson barked, his face turning red. The size of the officer seemed to loom over Caleb, but the young boy didn't flinch. His posture remained defiant, his gaze unwavering. Officer Thompson took a step closer, his voice dripping with menace. You better watch your mouth, kid, he warned, his anger rising. But Caleb didn't back down. The room fell silent again as everyone watched the standoff unfold. Thompson's attempts to intimidate Caleb only seemed to strengthen the young boy's resolve. Caleb was ready to face whatever came next. He wasn't going to let anyone, not even a police officer, silence him when he knew what was right. Just as Officer Thompson moved toward Caleb, his hand reaching out to grab the young boy by the arm, The atmosphere in the diner seemed to shift. Without warning, a commanding voice rang out, stopping Thompson dead in his tracks. "You will not lay a hand on my son," said Mayor Jenkins, Caleb's mother, her presence filling the room like a storm. She stood up from her table with a calm, yet undeniable authority. The diner fell into an almost reverent silence as Mayor Jenkins stepped forward, her eyes locked on Officer Thompson, unflinching. She was not just the mother of a brave boy. She was the mayor of their town, a leader with the power to challenge any abuse of authority. "And you will not treat that young man like a criminal simply because he asked a question," she continued, her voice firm and clear, yet carrying an undercurrent of righteous anger. Her words struck like a thunderclap in the room, and for the first time, Officer Thompson seemed unsure of himself. His grip on Caleb loosened as he looked at the mayor, his expression faltering. "You didn't think this through, did you?" Mayor Jenkins continued, her voice steady, unwavering. "You didn't investigate the situation fairly, and you didn't listen to what was really happening here. You didn't think Eric deserved to be treated with respect, just like you didn't think my son did. Well, I'm done." Mayor Jenkins reached into her pocket, pulling out her phone and making a quick call. "Officer Thompson, you are fired," she said, her words ringing out, loud and clear, enough for everyone to hear. The shock on Officer Thompson's face was unmistakable. His eyes widened in disbelief as the reality of what was happening began to sink in. He stood frozen for a moment, caught between his rage and the power of the mayor's words. For the first time, he was on the other side of authority, and the realization hit him hard. In that moment, it was clear. The abuse of power would not go unchallenged. Mayor Jenkins had not just defended her son, but she had stood up for justice in a way that would echo far beyond that diner. With Mayor Jenkins's words hanging in the air, the entire diner seemed to hold its breath. The power in her statement was undeniable, and the weight of what was happening began to settle in. Officer Thompson stood frozen, his face drained of color as the shock of his firing sank in. The once tense atmosphere in the room now shifted. What had been an uncomfortable, charged environment transformed into one of quiet awe. Eric, who had been standing his ground just moments before, felt the weight lift off his shoulders as the officer's grip on the situation dissolved. It wasn't just a moment of personal vindication for Eric. It was a turning point for everyone who had silently watched the injustice unfold. The diners who had been too afraid to speak up now looked around, their faces filled with a mix of relief and disbelief. Caleb, the 12-year-old boy whose courage had ignited this moment, stood tall, his small frame somehow making him appear bigger in that moment. It was his words that had sparked the change, his willingness to speak out against what was wrong that had set the wheels of justice in motion. And it wasn't just Caleb's bravery. Mayor Jenkins's swift and decisive action showed what true leadership looked like. By standing up, not just as a mother but as a leader committed to justice, she had delivered a swift blow to corruption and abuse of power. Her actions had not only resulted in the firing of Officer Thompson, but they had sparked something in the people who had witnessed it. Eric's ordeal was over, and the injustice had been corrected, but the impact of what had happened would reverberate far beyond that McDonald's. The diners who had once been too afraid to act now realized that silence only allowed injustice to grow. In the span of a few short moments, courage, leadership, and a commitment to doing what was right had completely changed the course of the day, and perhaps even the future of that small town. In the days that followed the incident at McDonald's, the story spread like wildfire throughout the town. Word of what had happened, of how a young boy had stood up to an officer and how the mayor had taken swift action, quickly became the talk of every street and every home. People who had once stayed silent in the face of injustice, whether out of fear or indifference, now found themselves inspired to speak out. They saw in Caleb's bravery and Mayor Jenkins' leadership a model of how small acts of courage could bring about big changes. Eric, once just a man quietly waiting for his meal, became a hero in the eyes of many. His calm, measured response to being treated unfairly showed the community what it meant to stand up for oneself, even in the face of intimidation. People began to see him not just as a victim of circumstance, but as a symbol of perseverance and dignity. Caleb, with his fearless words, sparked something even greater, a sense of empowerment among those who had been too afraid to challenge the status quo. His actions proved that even the youngest among us could make a difference, that the courage to speak out could shift the balance of power. It was a powerful reminder that change doesn't always come from grand gestures or monumental events. Sometimes, it begins with a single voice, raised in the face of wrongdoing. This ripple effect wasn't confined to just the town's borders. As the story of the McDonald's incident spread beyond the town, it inspired others to confront injustice in their own communities. People everywhere began to understand the profound impact of standing up for what's right, no matter how small or large the situation. It was a lesson in leadership, courage, and justice, one that would be passed down for generations. And all of it started with a young boy and a man simply trying to get a meal. Thank you so much for watching this story. It's a powerful reminder of how important it is to stand up for what's right, no matter the circumstances. Just like Eric and Caleb, each of us has the ability to make a difference when we choose to speak out against injustice. If you were inspired by this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire change and encourage us all to do better. Together, we can create a world where courage and justice lead the way. So remember, courage can change the world. Stay brave, and let's keep fighting for what's right. Until next time.